June 19, 1944. The sky above the Philippine Sea is a canvas of blue, torn by the roar of engines and the staccato rattle of machine guns. Sunlight glints off the wings of dozens of aircraft, weaving and spiraling in a deadly ballet. Below, the vast Pacific shimmers, indifferent to the chaos above. A formation of Mitsubishi A6M Zeros, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, slices through the air. Their pilots are veterans, calm, focused, confident in the legendary agility of their machines. For years, the Zero has ruled these skies, its name whispered with respect and fear by friend and foe alike. But today, something is different. Out of the sun, a new shape emerges, broad-shouldered, powerful, bristling with guns. The Grumman F6F Hellcat, its engine bellows, drowning out the familiar whine of the Zeros. In seconds, the Hellcat closes the distance, its 650 caliber guns spitting fire. A Zero shudders, trailing smoke, then spirals down toward the sea. Japanese pilots, trained to expect dominance, are stunned. The Hellcat is not just matching them, it is tearing through their ranks. In the cockpit, fear and disbelief flicker across faces that have never known defeat in the air. The age of the Zero is ending. A new predator has arrived. The Pacific. 1941. The world is at war, and the ocean stretches endlessly, dotted with islands that have become battlegrounds. The Imperial Japanese Navy, riding a wave of early victories, dominates the skies. Their secret weapon, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero. The Zero is a revelation. Lightweight, agile, and with a range that seems impossible, it sweeps aside all challengers. At Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, and the Philippines, American and Allied pilots find themselves outmatched. The Zero's tight turns and blistering climb rate make it a nightmare in a dogfight. Its pilots, many of them veterans of China and the early Pacific campaigns, are highly trained and fiercely loyal. For the United States, the early months of the war are a time of loss and learning. The U.S. Navy's frontline fighter, the F4F Wildcat, is rugged but outclassed. In the skies over the Coral Sea and Midway, American pilots fight with courage, but the cost is high. The Zero's dominance is so complete that it becomes a symbol of Japanese invincibility. Reports filter back to Washington and Pearl Harbor. Pilots describe the Zero's uncanny maneuverability, its ability to outturn and outclimb anything the Allies can field. Some even believe it is armored, invulnerable to bullets. In reality, the Zero is lightly built, sacrificing protection for speed and agility. But in the hands of skilled pilots, it is a weapon of terror. The U.S. Navy scrambles to adapt. Tactics change. Pilots are taught to avoid turning fights, to use boom and zoom attacks, diving from above, firing, then climbing away before the Zero can react. Still, losses mount. The psychological toll is heavy. For every victory, there are stories of squadrons decimated, of pilots lost at sea. By 1942, the tide begins to shift, but only slightly. At Midway, American dive bombers sink 4 Japanese carriers, a stunning blow. Yet in the air, the Zero remains a formidable foe. The Guadalcanal campaign grinds on, with both sides suffering. The Wildcat holds the line, but barely. In the factories and design offices of America, the search for a new fighter becomes urgent. The Navy needs a plane that can not only survive against the Zero, but dominate it. The answer will come from a company with a reputation for building tough, reliable aircraft, Grumman. The stage is set for a new chapter in the air war over the Pacific. The Zero's reign is about to be challenged, not by luck or numbers, but by innovation and determination. In the spring of 1942, as the Pacific War raged, Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation received a directive from the U.S. Navy. Design a fighter that could outfly, outgun, and outlast the Zero. The challenge was immense. The Zero's strengths were well known: its agility, its range, its ability to turn inside almost any opponent. But its weaknesses were also becoming clear. It lacked armor. Its fuel tanks were unprotected. If hit, it burned. Grumman's engineers, led by the legendary Leroy Grumman and chief designer William Schwendler, worked with relentless focus. They listened to the stories of pilots returning from the front. They studied captured Zeros, dissecting every rivet and control surface. The result was a design that would become the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat was a different breed. It was heavier, with a powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine that delivered over 2,000 horsepower. Its wings were broad and strong, designed to absorb punishment and keep flying. The cockpit was armored, the fuel tanks self-sealing. 650 caliber Browning machine guns gave it a devastating punch. It was not as nimble as the Zero in a tight turn, but it could dive faster, climb higher, and take far more damage. Production began at a feverish pace. American industry, now fully mobilized for war, turned out Hellcats by the thousands. The first units reached the fleet in the summer of 1943. Pilots transitioning from the Wildcat found the Hellcat forgiving, powerful, and deadly. It was a machine built for the realities of Pacific combat, rugged, reliable, and easy to maintain on the rolling decks of aircraft carriers. The timing was critical. By mid-1943, the U.S. Navy was preparing for a new phase of the war, the island-hopping campaign across the Central Pacific. Each new island seized would bring American forces closer to Japan. Air superiority was essential. The Hellcat would be the spearhead. The Japanese, meanwhile, were stretched thin. Their best pilots had been lost in the early battles. Training programs, once rigorous and selective, were now rushed and desperate. New pilots entered combat with only a fraction of the experience their predecessors had. The Zero, still formidable, was beginning to show its age. The first encounters between Hellcats and Zeros were telling. In the skies over the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, American pilots reported a new confidence. The Hellcat could take hits that would have destroyed a Wildcat. It could dive away from trouble, then climb back into the fight. The balance was shifting. By late 1943, the U.S. Navy was ready to test its new weapon on a grand scale. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide the fate of the Pacific Air War. The Hellcat, forged in the crucible of necessity, was about to meet the Zero head-on. The pilots who would fly these machines, on both sides, were about to face a new reality, one that would test their skill, their courage, and their will to survive. For the men who climbed into the cockpits of the Zero and the Hellcat, the war was not fought in grand strategies or sweeping maneuvers. It was fought in moments, split seconds of decision, fear, and instinct. Japanese pilots, many of whom had trained for years before the war, carried the weight of their nation's expectations. They were taught that honor and sacrifice were inseparable from victory. The Zero was their sword, and they wielded it with deadly skill. But by 1943, the faces in the ready rooms were changing. The veterans of Pearl Harbor and Coral Sea were gone, replaced by younger, less experienced men. Training was rushed. The war's demands were relentless. Still, the spirit of the samurai endured. Pilots strapped themselves into their Zeros with a sense of duty that bordered on fatalism. Across the ocean, American pilots were also changing. Early in the war, they had been outmatched, forced to learn hard lessons in blood and loss. But the arrival of the Hellcat brought a new sense of hope. Training programs grew more sophisticated. Pilots learned not just to survive, but to win. The Hellcat was forgiving, its controls responsive, its power immense. For many, it felt like a second chance, a machine that could bring them home. In the air, the differences were stark. Japanese pilots relied on agility and surprise, trusting their instincts and the nimbleness of their aircraft. American pilots, flying the Hellcat, learned to use their speed and firepower to fight on their own terms. The war in the Pacific became a contest not just of machines, but of men, each side pushing the other to the limits of endurance and courage. Tactics in the Pacific evolved as quickly as the machines themselves. Early in the war, Japanese pilots dominated with their thatch weave, a defensive maneuver that allowed two planes to cover each other, turning the tables on attackers. But as the Hellcat entered service, American tactics shifted from defense to offense. The Hellcat's speed and durability allowed pilots to dictate the terms of engagement. They avoided turning fights, where the Zero still held an edge, and instead used altitude and energy. Diving attacks became the norm, swooping down from above, firing a burst, then climbing away before the enemy could react. The Hellcat could absorb hits that would cripple a Zero, giving its pilots the confidence to press the attack. Japanese doctrine, built around the strengths of the Zero, began to falter. The aircraft's lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks made it vulnerable to the Hellcat's heavy guns. Pilots who once felt invincible now found themselves hunted. The element of surprise, once their greatest weapon, was slipping away. In the chaos of battle, tactics were often improvised. Pilots relied on instinct, training, and the capabilities of their machines. The Hellcat's arrival forced a fundamental shift in the way air combat was fought over the Pacific. The hunter had become the hunted. The contest between the Zero and the Hellcat was, at its core, a battle of technology. The Zero, designed in the late 1930s, was a marvel of engineering, lightweight, agile, and with an extraordinary range. Its designers had sacrificed armor and firepower for speed and maneuverability, creating a plane that could outturn any opponent. But by 1943, the limitations of that philosophy were clear. The Hellcat, in contrast, was a product of American industrial might and battlefield experience. Heavier, faster, and far more robust, it was built to survive the rigors of carrier warfare. Its 650 caliber machine guns could shred enemy aircraft in seconds. Its engine, nearly twice as powerful as the Zero's, gave it a decisive edge in speed and climb. The Hellcat's cockpit was a fortress, with armor plating and bulletproof glass. Its fuel tanks were protected, reducing the risk of fire. Maintenance crews found it easy to repair, even after heavy damage. The Zero, for all its elegance, could not match the Hellcat's resilience. In the end, the battle between the Zero and the Hellcat was a clash of design philosophies: agility versus power, finesse versus brute strength. The outcome would reshape the skies over the Pacific. In the war rooms of both nations, the struggle for air superiority was fought not just in the sky, but in the minds of commanders. For the U.S. Navy, the lessons of early defeats were seared into memory. Admirals like Chester W. Nimitz and Raymond Spruance understood that victory would require more than courage. It would demand adaptation. They pushed for better training, more aggressive tactics, and above all, superior technology. The decision to fast-track the Hellcat's development was a gamble, but one rooted in hard-won experience. On the Japanese side, the leadership faced a different reality. The Zero had been a symbol of national pride, its early successes celebrated across the empire. But as losses mounted, cracks began to show. Senior officers clung to outdated doctrines, believing that the spirit of the pilot could overcome any technological disadvantage. Training programs, once the envy of the world, were shortened to replace fallen aces. The result was a new generation of pilots, brave but unprepared for the changing face of aerial combat. American commanders, meanwhile, embraced innovation. They encouraged pilots to share tactics, to learn from every engagement. The Hellcat became more than a machine. It was a symbol of a new approach to war. The U.S. Navy's willingness to adapt, to question old assumptions, would prove decisive in the battles to come. For Japanese pilots, the arrival of the Hellcat was a shock that rippled through every squadron. The Zero had been their shield and sword, a machine that seemed to defy the laws of physics. But now, in the skies over the central Pacific, they faced an enemy that could not be outturned, outclimbed, or outgunned. Reports from the front were grim. Pilots spoke of Hellcats that shrugged off hits, that dove and climbed with terrifying speed, that unleashed torrents of gunfire with deadly accuracy. The psychological impact was profound. Veteran pilots, once confident in their superiority, found themselves on the defensive. New recruits, barely trained, were thrown into battles they could scarcely comprehend. The sense of invincibility that had defined the early years of the war was gone, replaced by a grim determination to survive. In mess halls and briefing rooms, the talk turned from victory to survival. The enemy had changed, and with it, the very nature of the war. The Zero, once the hunter, was now the hunted. The shock of the Hellcat's arrival was not just tactical, it was existential. Beneath the statistics and strategies, the war in the air was a human tragedy. Every victory came at a price, lives lost, families shattered, futures erased. For American pilots, the Hellcat offered a measure of hope, a chance to return home. But it also brought new responsibilities. The power to dominate the skies meant the power to destroy, to end lives in an instant. For Japanese pilots, the war became a test of endurance. The code of Bushido demanded sacrifice, but the reality was often brutal. Many flew knowing they would not return. The loss of so many experienced aviators was a wound that would never fully heal. In the end, the battle between the Hellcat and the Zero was more than a contest of machines. It was a struggle of wills, of values, of humanity itself. The skies over the Pacific became a crucible, forging heroes and breaking hearts in equal measure. As the summer of 1944 approached, these angles, human, tactical, technological, and moral, would converge in a single decisive confrontation. June 19, 1944. The sun rises over the Philippine Sea, casting long shadows across the decks of the U.S. Navy's Carrier Task Force. The air is thick with anticipation. Below, thousands of sailors and airmen prepare for the day's battle, checking weapons, fueling planes, and scanning the horizon for the enemy. The invasion of the Marianas is underway, and the fate of the Pacific hangs in the balance. On the Japanese side, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commands the largest carrier force Japan has assembled since Midway. His fleet includes 9 carriers, bristling with over 400 aircraft, Zeros, Judys, and Vals. The plan is bold: strike the American fleet, destroy its carriers, and halt the U.S. advance. But the reality is grim. Many of Ozawa's pilots are green, their training rushed, their experience limited. The veteran corps that once dominated the Pacific is gone. The Americans, under Admiral Raymond Spruance and Task Force 58's Mark Mitcher, are ready. Their carriers launch wave after wave of Hellcats, Avengers, and Dauntlesses. The Hellcat, now the backbone of the fleet, is everywhere on the decks, in the air, circling above the ships like guardian hawks. Pilots brief for combat, their faces set with determination. They know what's coming. At 10:00 a.m., radar operators aboard the USS Lexington pick up the first blips, enemy aircraft, inbound at high altitude. The call goes out. Bogies, bearing 270, Angels 15. Hellcat squadrons scramble, engines roaring to life, wheels lifting from the decks in rapid succession. The sky fills with blue-painted fighters, climbing to intercept. The first engagement is swift and brutal. Japanese Zeros, flying in tight formation, spot the Hellcats and turn to engage. For a moment, it is as it always was. Dogfights, twisting and turning, pilots straining against G-forces. But the balance has shifted. The Hellcats dive from above, their guns blazing. Zeros burst into flames, spiraling down in black smoke. The Americans press their advantage, using speed and firepower to devastating effect. Throughout the day, wave after wave of Japanese aircraft attempt to break through. Each time, they are met by swarms of Hellcats. The U.S. pilots, many with months of combat experience, fight with discipline and precision. They fly in pairs, covering each other, executing the tactics honed over countless battles. The Japanese, outnumbered and outgunned, are cut down in staggering numbers. By noon, the scale of the disaster is clear. Japanese pilots, shocked by the ferocity and effectiveness of the Hellcats, struggle to adapt. Their attacks falter. Many never reach the American fleet. Those who do are met by a wall of anti-aircraft fire and more Hellcats waiting to pounce. The battle rages for hours. The sky is littered with burning wreckage, parachutes drifting down toward the sea. Radio chatter crackles with reports. Splash 10. Bandits at 2 o'clock. I'm hit. Bailing out. The Americans maintain air superiority. Their losses minimal compared to the devastation inflicted on the Japanese. As the sun sets, the outcome is undeniable. The U.S. Navy has achieved one of the most lopsided victories in the history of aerial warfare. Over 300 Japanese aircraft are destroyed, most by Hellcats. The term Great Mariana's Turkey Shoot is born, a grim testament to the one-sided nature of the fight. But for the men in the air, the day is not yet over. The battle's second act is about to begin. As the shattered remnants of the Japanese air arm struggle to regroup, and the Americans press their advantage. Night falls over the Philippine Sea, but the battle does not end. On the decks of American carriers, pilots and crew work by the glow of red lamps, refueling, rearming, and preparing for another wave. The air is thick with the smell of oil and cordite, the tension broken only by the distant rumble of engines and the occasional cheer as returning Hellcats land safely. For the Japanese, the night is a time of reckoning. Admiral Ozawa's fleet, battered and bleeding, attempts to regroup. Communications are chaotic. Many pilots do not return. Those who do are shaken, their confidence shattered by the day's events. The Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, has been humbled. The stories spread quickly. Hellcats that seemed invincible. American pilots who fought with a new, relentless precision. The next morning, June 20th, the Americans press their advantage. With intelligence reports indicating the location of the retreating Japanese fleet, Admiral Mitcher makes a bold decision. He orders a late afternoon strike, knowing his pilots will have to return in darkness, a risk rarely taken in carrier warfare. The order is given. Launch the attack. Hundreds of aircraft roar off the decks, Hellcats leading the way as escorts for bombers and torpedo planes. The sun dips low as the American strike force finds the Japanese carriers. Bombs and torpedoes rain down, igniting fires and sending ships to the bottom. The Hellcats fend off desperate Japanese defenders, their guns blazing in the fading light. The return flight is harrowing. Many American pilots run low on fuel, forced to ditch in the sea or land on darkened decks, guided only by the faint glow of signal lamps. Rescue operations continue through the night, with destroyers plucking survivors from the water. The cost is high, but the victory is total. By the end of June 20th, the scale of the Japanese defeat is clear. 3 carriers are sunk, hundreds of aircraft lost, and the core of Japan's experienced naval aviators is gone. The Imperial Japanese Navy's ability to project air power is crippled, perhaps irreparably. For the Americans, the triumph is more than tactical. It is psychological. The Hellcat has proven itself beyond doubt, not just as a match for the Zero, but as its superior. Pilots who once feared the legendary Japanese fighter now speak of it with respect, but not awe. The balance of power in the Pacific has shifted. The Battle of the Philippine Sea marks a turning point. The skies, once ruled by the Zero, now belong to the Hellcat. The road to victory in the Pacific is open, but the cost has been immense, and the war is far from over. The consequences of this battle will ripple through both navies, shaping the final year of the conflict and the fate of thousands. In the days following the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the scale of the Japanese defeat becomes undeniable. Reports filter in from every corner of the fleet. The numbers are staggering. Over 2 days, the Imperial Japanese Navy loses more than 600 aircraft, nearly 90% of its carrier-based air power. Of these, the majority fall to the guns of the F6F Hellcat. The American losses are a fraction by comparison. Fewer than 130 aircraft are lost, many to fuel exhaustion or ditching at sea rather than enemy action. The Hellcat's kill ratio is unprecedented. For every Hellcat lost, more than 10 Japanese planes are destroyed. The myth of the Zero's invincibility is shattered. On the Japanese carriers, the devastation is total. Flight decks are scorched, hangars empty. The few surviving pilots are exhausted, haunted by the memory of burning aircraft and the relentless pursuit of the Hellcats. The loss of so many experienced aviators is a blow from which the Japanese Navy will never recover. Training programs, already strained, cannot replace the skill and intuition lost in a single battle. Admiral Ozawa's fleet limps back to port, its power broken. The Japanese High Command is forced to confront a grim reality. The era of carrier dominance is over. Without air cover, the great ships of the Imperial Navy are vulnerable, their fate sealed by the events of those 2 days in June. For the Americans, the victory is both strategic and symbolic. The Hellcat has proven itself as the master of the Pacific skies. Pilots return to their carriers as heroes, their confidence transformed. The lessons of early defeats, at Coral Sea, at Midway, at Guadalcanal, have been paid back in full. The U.S. Navy's industrial might is on full display. New Hellcats roll off the assembly lines in Long Island and Bethpage, ready to replace any losses. The fleet grows stronger with each passing month, while the Japanese struggle to rebuild. The balance of power has shifted decisively. Yet beneath the celebration, there is a sober recognition of the cost. The sea is littered with wreckage, the names of the lost etched into the memory of every survivor. The war is not over. The enemy, though wounded, is not yet defeated. The aftermath of the battle sets the stage for the final campaigns of the Pacific War, a relentless drive toward the Japanese homeland, with the Hellcat leading the way. In the months that follow the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the consequences of the Hellcat's triumph ripple across the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once the master of carrier warfare, is now a shadow of its former self. The loss of so many aircraft and, more critically, so many experienced pilots cannot be undone. Japan's new aviators, rushed through training, lack the skills and confidence of their predecessors. The Zero, once the symbol of Japanese air power, is now outmatched in every encounter. American carrier task forces, emboldened by their victory, press forward with renewed vigor. The Hellcat becomes the spearhead of every major operation, striking at the Palos, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. In each campaign, the pattern repeats. Hellcats sweep the skies, clearing the way for bombers and ground forces. Japanese resistance grows increasingly desperate, but the outcome is never in doubt. The statistics tell the story. By war's end, the F6F Hellcat claims over 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed, more than any other Allied fighter in the Pacific. Its kill-to-loss ratio stands at an astonishing 19 to 1. The Zero, for all its early glory, is relegated to a supporting role, often flown by inexperienced pilots in a losing cause. For the men who fly the Hellcat, the transformation is profound. Early in the war, American pilots had faced the Zero with trepidation, knowing that a single mistake could be fatal. Now, they fly with confidence, trusting in their machines and their training. The Hellcat is not just a weapon, it is a lifeline, a symbol of American resilience and ingenuity. The Japanese, meanwhile, are forced to adapt. With their carrier air arm decimated, they turn increasingly to desperate measures: kamikaze attacks, suicide missions, and last-ditch defenses. The psychological impact of the Hellcat's dominance is felt at every level, from the highest command to the youngest recruit. The myth of the invincible Zero is gone, replaced by a grim determination to fight on, no matter the odds. The legacy of the Hellcat extends beyond the battlefield. Its success validates the American approach to aircraft design, prioritizing survivability, firepower, and ease of maintenance. The lessons learned in the Pacific will shape the next generation of fighters, influencing designs for decades to come. As the war draws to a close, the Hellcat stands as a testament to the power of adaptation and the relentless drive for superiority. The skies over the Pacific, once ruled by the Zero, now belong to a new master. The era of the Hellcat is secure. The final chapter of this story is not written in the smoke and fire of battle, but in the quiet moments that follow, when pilots remember the friends they lost, the enemies they respected, and the machines that carried them through the storm. The story of the F6F Hellcat and the Mitsubishi Zero is more than a tale of machines and tactics. It is a story of adaptation, resilience, and the relentless pace of change in war. In the crucible of the Pacific, two nations poured their hopes and fears into the skies, each believing in the strength of their pilots and the promise of their technology. For the Japanese, the Zero was a symbol of national pride, a marvel of engineering that, for a time, seemed unstoppable. Its early victories were not just tactical successes, but proof of a nation's spirit and ingenuity. Yet, as the war dragged on, the limitations of that philosophy became clear. The world changed, and the Zero could not change with it. The Hellcat, by contrast, was born from adversity. It was not the product of a single vision, but of countless lessons learned in defeat and determination. Its designers listened to the voices of pilots who had faced the Zero and survived. Its engineers built a machine that could absorb punishment, deliver overwhelming firepower, and bring its pilots home. In the hands of young Americans, it became a tool of liberation and, inevitably, destruction. The clash between these two fighters was not just a contest of speed or firepower. It was a test of ideas, the value of innovation, the cost of complacency, and the human price of technological progress. The Hellcat's victory was not inevitable. It was earned through sacrifice, through adaptation, and through the willingness to learn from failure. In the end, the skies over the Pacific remind us that no advantage lasts forever. Every triumph is temporary, every legend eventually challenged. The men who flew and fought in those blue expanses carried the weight of history on their wings. Their courage, and the machines they trusted, shaped the world that followed. The Hellcat's legacy is not just in the numbers or the victories, but in the enduring lesson that survival belongs to those who adapt, and that even the mightiest can be humbled by the winds of change.